and then I'm going live also on our Instagram,
Oh,
and
awesome.
I'm trying something a little bit different here,
Okay,
and
sounds good.
but
I didn't know that you could use this for Instagram. That's pretty cool.
you can't
Oh,
you
okay.
can't. I've got a separate. My iPad is
Gotcha.
separately set, and it's videoing my screen.
Ah, okay.
And so it's a whole new kind of different thing that I'm trying to do. I've been working on a way to do this for a while, and I finally kind of figured it out.
That's
But
pretty cool.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
kind of
you're
I'm a technological idiot in all of this, and I've been playing with my cameras, and I got a new screen, and but I love all this technical fun stuff. But welcome, Judy Cho,
Thank you.
author, nutritionist, coach, to help people through this life journey of many diseases. And Judy's book is The Carnivore Cure. We can find it on Amazon and also on your website.
Yes.
Welcome, Judy. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this carnivore stuff, which is radical. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Kiltz. It's always fun talking with you. So I guess really where it starts is in college, a friend introduced me to the Master Cleanse, which is very plant-based. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do this elimination diet, but I'm very into, I want to learn a little bit more about the science. So I read his book. I didn't really pursue further from the book, but I read that book and he was like, meat is not good for your gut. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just try it. And anyways, that experiment lasted for about 12 years and I got really sick. Sure, I was a little bit thinner, but my mental health started struggling. And then on top of that, I also started having an eating disorder. So um, I would be eating clean or plant based for most of the day. And then by nighttime, I was hungry and my body was like craving all these good fats. And I was eating a very low fat version of plant based. And so it would cause me to binge. And then I was like, oh no, I can't gain weight. So what can I do? And it was this vicious cycle. And over time, all of that, I guess that behavior started making me really struggle with anxiety and depression. And fast forward time, I was able to kind of mask it for about 12 years. So plant based, struggling with an eating disorder. And then I got married and had my first son, and I was still struggling with it. So even throughout my pregnancy, while the binging and purging kind of lessened, it was still there. And thank God he's okay. But at 6 months, when I was nursing him, I got sick. I had mastitis and I had to get antibiotics. And then for some reason, I had a mental breakdown. So I was still using behavior, still eating plant based, nursing around the clock. And then all of a sudden, I end up in the mental ward on New Year's Eve, where basically I don't remember a lot of it. And not once did they ask me, what is your diet? Like, what's going on? And they just equated it to, oh, she has postpartum depression. Now, granted, that's 6 months later. So normally postpartum is right after you had the baby. And
Mm-hmm.
they said, I think you need to get support for your eating disorder. And so that's what I did. But in there, they taught me like, oh, you need to eat a variety and you need to be balanced. And so they would challenge me to, you need to be able to eat a cupcake. And if you don't, and if that requires you to binge, then you're not healed. And so a lot of the cognitive behavioral things they taught me was really good, but the food portion was completely wrong. And I didn't know that. So I trusted the dietitians in there, and it just got me sicker and sicker over time. I would end up falling and I would end up binging again. And I'm just like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I have the discipline to get better? And then fast forward, I ran into the ketogenic diet, and while I was on maternity leave, and I fell in love with it. And I learned about nutrition, and everything I knew about nutrition was wrong. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, I must know nothing about nutrition and wellness. And so I just had my second child, and I was like, I never want to go through this again. And I looked into nutrition, and I ended up going back to nutritional therapy school to get healing. And now that I eat mostly and only meat, I healed my mental health. I don't struggle with an eating disorder. And I thought I would have to struggle with it for the rest of my life. And I'm completely sober. And the fact that I don't struggle with depression, which I used to be on antidepressants, antipsychotics, and all of these things, and I don't anymore, I realized like so much of what we self-blame is the food and what we listen to and what we believe about ourselves. And so we have to start with the diet to get better. And so I changed my career. I was a successful management consultant, and I was like, I don't want anyone to go through my dark past because they were wrong and led to believe that plant-based is healthy and plant-based is best. When really, if you eat a nutritionally dense diet of meats with the most bioavailable foods, you can actually heal, and then you could do whatever you want with life. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Well, the book is amazing, and
Thank you.
the Carnivore Cure, and it is, it's a light bulb, because I know, like you, I suffered from so many things for so long,
Right.
and finally at 55, I went carnivore. I was doing keto and paleo before that, and it changed my life. And I think we feel like we've got this thing, a secret, and we just want to tell the world how amazing you can feel and how all these diseases go away, and voila. And who are some of the people that you first learned from on the keto journey? Any particular books or people that you can remember from?
Um, I know there was, so Leanne Vogel was one for sure, or Vogel. So she was one. And then I would say in the carnivore space. So what happened was I was keto plant-based, and then I would still struggle occasionally. And that's when I had peers saying, you should try just meat only and see if you can heal. And it was, again, just going to be an experiment because I thought it was kind of crazy. And then it changed my life. So that's why I stayed and then became an advocate for it. But I would say, I think Leanne had a book, and then just her content, her podcast, just normalizing this way of eating, that it's not crazy to eat high fat. And then I ran into Dr. Kevin Stock's research, a lot of his writings, and Amber O'Hearn, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but a psychologist that's carnivore as well. And so those were the
Georgia Eden.
Oh, yes, yes. So a lot of her, and because I have a psychology background in my studies, and so fell in love with her work. And then that's when really started going down the rabbit hole. So not a particular book, but I would just say content.
And how have people been accepting your way of life, and you're sharing this maybe in the space of the people you were talking to before, or how's it opening up in the conversation?
So when I first started, and I was, an advocate of healing my own journey, I was trying to advocate for my family and close friends and best friends. And for those people, it was just and this was where keto was still a little new, not as, as popular as it is now. And it was very, oh, I can't do extreme things like that. Like, I'm not wired your way. That just sounds kind of crazy. And they just, and I realized at that point where there's no point in advocating to people that are not willing to listen yet or not willing to be open. And that's when I started realizing I'm just going to go on the internet, because I'll find people that are willing to be open, and then I can share. And that's how we can change the world, right? We can help people that are willing to be open. And if they change one person or help them to heal in that way, or share their story and look at my 100-pound weight loss, or look at that I'm no longer on psychotic meds, those are the ways to heal. But I would, being fully candid, my mom and dad have healed tremendously from carnivore. So they had all the metabolic disease and they no longer suffer from that. But beyond that, I mean, I think people still think it's like a little bit of a, whoa, that's an extreme diet that may not be right. They still believe that saturated fats are bad and that's what's causing heart disease and that type of stuff. But I would say the community members online have been a tremendous benefit, where I get motivated by their stories. And those are the people that I guess I continue to do this for. But the immediate real life community, it's still a struggle.
It is, and I know for me, because we write these things, we share them, and we get like the what, and I'm like, listen, and we doctors and scientists and nutritionists, we're so pig-headed that we will not be open to change. And why we're that way, it doesn't make sense to me, because ultimately, wouldn't you want to be open to the possibilities of eliminating every disease, not needing all these drugs, and feeling the best you can ever feel?
Right.
But it is a home run what you've written, and your book is amazing because
Thank you.
you have a tremendous amount of data of the real needs for the human body. And the thing, and I too have read a lot from Kevin Stock. He's quoted in my keto
Oh,
lifestyle
okay. Okay.
book, and it's amazing. But plants, what about plants? Do you think are the reason for the diseases?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any particular thoughts on that maybe you can share? And then we
Sure.
got a question from Tor. We'll ask that in just 1 second.
Okay, yeah. So I think just to think of it really simplistically, right? We can talk about anti-nutrients and the specifics, but really, if you think about it, every single species in this world, they want to survive and they want to, continue population and that type of thing. So if you know that when humans have babies, we are super protective, right? There's mama bear, that type of stuff. And then we have that with the animals. So when you're hunting, right, you have to hide, you have to wear camouflage clothing. Well, plants are the same. So plants, because they cannot move, because they cannot roam, they have to have the biochemistry. The toxins are within the plant. So the thought is that, hey, if an animal comes by and eats me, then maybe they'll get sick, or maybe they'll vomit, or maybe they'll have loose stools, and they'll never eat me again because I taught them as a plant, like, I'm going to make you sick, so therefore leave me alone. And so if you think about the way that we eat in America and the rest of the world, our diet now is about 70 to 80% plant. So in technicality, almost everyone is plant-based. If you eat mostly grains and veggies, and then like the fruits, right? So like orange juice. So if you think about a breakfast, orange juice, bread, jam, all of that are from plants. So in essence, we are mostly eating plant-based. So if your diet is 80% plant-based, and a lot of it uses processing. So not only is it the genetic makeup of these plants. So at this point, we know that gluten is, for a lot of people, is toxic. It causes gut pain, and then people have the celiac disease where it's even worse. Well, that's an anti-nutrient. And then there's like 20 anti-nutrients in plants. So maybe you're not as sensitive to celiacs or as much to gluten, but it might be in spinach and almonds and dark chocolate. There's oxalates which bind to minerals, and so they may cause you joint pain. They can cause depression and mental fatigue, these types of things. But not only that, these plants also bind to other things. So sure, spinach has a lot of iron, but they also have mineral binding properties that basically won't allow you to absorb these minerals. So yes, on paper, it shows a lot of nutrients, but in real life, it may not be actually nourishing your body. And that's the thing that's really tricky about nutrition. Sure, you can say that meat and plants are similar in nutrients and nutrient density, but the bioavailability of the nutrients are different. And then the last thing is the way that we are harvesting plants now. It's so different than back in the day. So we use glyphosate, we use GMOs, we use herbicides. Even the amount of organic plant pesticides we use is like double or triple the amount we use for just the generic type. So even if you eat an organic carrot, I wrote about this recently, but organic carrots have citrox, which is like a antibacterial, antifungal. So you're eating almost a little bit of like hand sanitizer while you're eating these organic carrots, or the regular versions have Clorox in it. So, or like chlorine. So which one do you want to take? Like, pick your poison, right? So it's all of these things that then make plants a little less friendly for us. And we don't think about these things. We think we're nourishing with lots of iron and lots of all these other minerals and vitamins. But in reality, they have to be also conjugated in our bodies. And a lot of times our bodies are not able to do it.
So what about the conversation about all the antioxidants that are in vegetables and superfoods, and these are really helpful to
Sure.
reduce cancer and those sort of things? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in my book, I try to argue every single little thing that's a concern eating meat only, and especially as a meat only elimination diet, you don't have to do it forever. I mean, find your balance and then see what you want to introduce back. But there are antioxidants in animal foods. So, for example, that reddish pink hue in salmon is called azathanthin. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but that's an antioxidant. There are other amino acids that act like antioxidants, and it's listed in the book. But the thing is also, everything that's good can also become bad. So if you think about, a lot of antioxidants can actually convert to pro-oxidants, and then it can do exactly the thing that you want it to protect you from. So what do antioxidants do? They go around and they help clean up some cells that are causing oxidation, inflammation. So that's what antioxidants are supposed to do. But if you have too much antioxidants or too many, then they can become pro-oxidants, meaning they can cause inflammation. So there's a fine balance. And then the argument is, if you are eating mostly like no veggie, no plant diet, then there's less inflammation in the body anyway. So you don't even need that level of antioxidants, because your body is eating foods that are less toxic on the body.
What I've learned about science is there are a lot of theories, and then they write a paper, and then we believe the theory as if it's true science.
Oh, totally.
I'm betting $1 billion there's no such thing as an antioxidant. I think it's bullshit. That's what I'm beginning to learn or believe in, as I'm understanding the scientific literature or the publications and how anyone gets anything published anyway. It's so crazy. All right, Core, hello, Robert and Judy. Could you please discuss your viewpoints on male fertility, sperm count motility, and maybe how this differs on the carnivore diets versus the lion diet? Well, I don't know. What are your thoughts on the carnivore versus lion? I don't know. I think those are the same, but
it's like nuance. I mean, I love Michaela Peterson. I would say that if it's mostly ruminant, but I think she allows, like, later, as you also do an elimination, that you can add other foods as well. But there are nutrient deficiencies in ruminant meat. It's not a lot. It's just I guess deficiencies isn't the right word, but it's just less of if you also include fish and eggs and other foods in the animal-based kingdom. But in general, it is similar. I wouldn't worry too much about it. The key really for testosterone and other hormones is eating sufficient fat and eating enough that you're not under eating, and also managing your stress. The cortisol pathway, the steroid hormone pathway, is all the same when you go trying to make sex hormones versus making cortisol. So if you don't have enough nutrients in the raw materials, your body's going to go and make everything produce cortisol, and then your DHEA, your testosterone, and all the other sex hormones will suffer. So it's not necessarily what diet is right, but more, are you eating enough? Are you having sufficient fat? Are you having enough cholesterol that produces these steroid hormones? And are you making sure to reduce your stress? Because more stress causes more requirements of cortisol, and it's just not an ideal thing.
So the basically the sperm motility and development is damaged by a plant-based diet because the plants contain testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. These are the phytohormones that basically damage, and then the glycation that damages sperm production, sperm motility, morphology, DNA, because it's all about inflammation. And I'm not sure. I think there's a difference between carnivore and lion. I mean, I did a TEDx talk a number of years ago on the Lion King plan. I mean, basically, we are hunters. Right. You know, you only ate plants because you just didn't have enough meat. Like, why would you ever eat a seed or a nut or a berry? Truly, but I'm not sure. But I've been watching. Michaela Peterson is awesome. You know, and there's so much we're all sharing in this space on how to improve. But ultimately, I tell people, if you're infertile, male or female, doesn't matter, you're unhealthy. So everyone talks about, well, I'm healthy, I'm just infertile. But isn't fertility like the foundation of why we're even alive?
Right.
And so, you know, this idea that we're supposed to be a nutritionist or a doctor or an engineer or anything is all made up, because ultimately it's just part of the stuff we do in order to build a family and all of this.
Yeah, as I get into nutrition and then holistic health, I really think about Our bodies just try to do the best with what it has. So the goal would be to have offspring and be healthy enough to make babies. But if your body is not healthy enough, whether it has toxins, whether it's under eating, whether it's malnourished, whether there's too much stress, whatever the reason is, the body will protect you first before saying you have the ability to have offspring. Our bodies want us to have offspring. That's how we continue life. But if we are not well enough, our bodies will say, okay, we have to do whatever for your body first before we can even make the decision of having babies. And so that I fully agree with you.
What are your thoughts on a diary, a food diary, and keeping track of what you're eating? Do you encourage that, or do you have any conversations with people on that type of lifestyle?
Sure. So I do. I recommend a food and mood journal, and not because, okay, I'm trying to track my calories. You could do that if you tend to undereat. And so the goal would be so that you have a amount of calories or macros that you eat. And therefore, for that reason, if you want to track the calories, fine. But in general, I do it more for the food and mood journal. And that is really to understand when you are eliminating all these foods to then figure out like, where is my normal baseline? So baseline meaning I sleep through the night or sleep mostly through the night. I don't have any symptoms. I don't feel like bloated and achy after eating a meal. I don't have joint pain. I don't have all of these things, even mood issues. And so once you find that baseline, you could figure out, um, let's say you're doing it for an elimination. So one is if you're still reacting to all the foods in the animal-based diet, then you may want to figure out, okay, maybe it's the pork. Maybe I'm not doing so well with pork. So you eliminate it. And then you eliminate for a while and it's like, does my symptoms decrease? And if it does, the only way you'll be able to figure that out is if you write. I can ask my clients all day long, okay, what did you eat a week ago? And they'll kind of remember, but they can't really remember how bad they felt or how their stools were or their sleep unless they track it. And that's one of the biggest things that has helped my clients figure out what foods are their friends and what foods are their foes.
We love variety.
Yeah.
And I tell everyone that you don't feed your dog variety, your cat variety. And ultimately, historically, we probably had almost no variety in our diet. And variety and spices are very damaging to our bodies. It's kind of something that we don't even think about because we're so used to it. I'm Italian. I grew up in LA, a lot of Mexican food. We love spices. And yet, how do you talk to people about all of those, the onions and the garlics and where do you go on those sort of things?
So it depends on how unwell people are, but I normally start with no spices because if you think about it, if we just talked about plants, right, like gluten, lectins, phytates, they're all anti-nutrients that are in every single plant. Well, if you're starting to use seasonings and there's like a seasoning blend, well, then there's like a concentration of lots of vegetables in small doses, but there's a lot of it. And so you may be reacting. And I've had people using the food and mood journal realize that when they use onions or when people are making bone broth and they add the veggies, the anti-nutrients are getting into the broth, even if they don't eat the vegetables. And so when someone's not feeling well, I say cut these spices too, because I talked about in the book, there was sesame seeds that they found there was poison in them. And it's because a lot of them are not regulated. And it's just kind of scary, right? So if you want to just get a baseline of health at a point, it might be better to remove the spices. And then when you're feeling better, you can do a reintroduction, use the food and mood journal and figure out, okay, can I do onions? And then can I do the dried version? Because the dried versions are a lot more potent, even though they're really small.
So a spice gives us a hot and some other tanginess that we like, but if it feels like that in the tongue, what does it do to our GI tract? And then it gets inside our bloodstream and goes to every cell of our body. What are the effects of that on every single cell of our body? We know that peppers can burn, right? And so if it burns our tongue, what does it do to everything else inside of our body, right?
Yeah, so we are our food, right? So I always compare this to my kids' Legos when they're trying to build an amazing creation. They need the foundation and the building blocks to do well. So if you are fueling with less than ideal food, that's all that your cells have. and that can use to then make the things for your body. And that could be a reason that, okay, as I'm building the cells in the body, I don't have enough of the building blocks to then reproduce, for example. But for example, with the pepper, there's like anti-nutrients. There's a thing called capsaicin in them, and they're nightshades, and they just cause a lot of inflammation in the gut. And so if it's causing inflammation in the gut, and that's where we absorb most of our nutrients, well, maybe the pepper is not doing that much damage in terms of nutrients, but now if you're eating a steak right after and your gut is becoming more leaky, well, now you can't even absorb as much of the nutrients in the meat. And that's where it becomes this vicious cycle of, oh, that one cookie or that one pepper, that one seasoning is not a big deal. It is if you're not feeling that well. When you're eliminating, it's best to be strict. And then you can always reintroduce when you're ready, when you're healthier, and figure out what works for you. But in general, it's not ideal as you're trying to heal. And that's why, I mean, most of America and most people have metabolic disease and are unwell.
It's sad to see, and the sad thing to me is our Western medical the environment is continually to tell people to do the exact wrong thing that's causing their diseases,
Right.
which is causing them to die early, suffer for years,
Right.
and cost them dearly, not only their life but money that they
Right.
can't afford. And our government is supporting that. That's just sad.
Yeah. I wrote a blog post on Beyond Meat burgers, and I dissected the ingredients, and this is the stuff that gets me really upset, and why I share a lot is, there are people that may not financially be able to afford Beyond Meat because it's a lot more expensive per pound than ground beef. And they go to these fast food restaurants, and it's like, why do they target fast foods to add these plant-based meats? But anyways, so then people will go there and think, I need to eat more plants. I need to stop eating meat for the environment. And so they think they're doing a good job for the environment, for their own health. And so they pay like $2 more for the hamburger that's meatless versus the ground beef one. But in reality, they're making themselves sicker. I mean, they use canola oil, and I know the World Health Organization loves canola oil and recommends it for everyone. But I mean, when I did the actual research of how they make canola oil, they burn it 7 times. So we think about oils. Let's just say canola oil is healthy. The fact that they burn this oil 7 times so that we don't taste the flavoring, we don't see the illness that is of a rapeseed plant, and then we eat these and it's tasteless, but it's already oxidized because it's been burned so many times, and that doesn't even consider the fatty acid makeup of these oils. And people are eating this, and instead of eating meats that are making its more bioavailable nutrients and that are healthy for hormonal health, we struggle with mental health right now. And a lot of that is, if you don't have good gut health, you don't have the nutrients, your body's going to try to have your body survive versus the mental health side. And this is where we need to really focus on quality meats instead of thinking that plant-based is good for us, because it's not. And in fact, Beyond Meat, I think their sales have plummeted recently.
Well, it's a deadly food, in my opinion. It's a cancer causing. Vegetables make us vegetables. We know if someone says they're a vegetable, eating vegetables will make you a vegetable. And it's really hard to believe these thoughts and ideas. Were just like a little crazy.
Right.
But it's quite amazing why would we want a burger made out of vegetables? Because our bodies, our brains want a burger. Because meat, your brain wants it bad. We've been domesticated. We've been basically corralled with a chain around our necks and fed a grass and grain diet to a lioness and a lion. And that is the craziest stuff that we are learning every day. And it's an uphill battle, but really, I think maybe if we reframe our story, that we're just teaching away an ancient way. It's an ancient nutritional model that because I hear people that are reading your book and listening to your story and seeing you that have healed. And it's so important a story to tell.
Yeah. I mean, if we were to just dig a little bit in history, heart disease didn't really exist over 100 years ago. And we were always eating meat. We were always eating butter. A lot of these margarines and canola oils and these newer foods have not been around. And people are just, we believe the science where it says a heart disease is by these meats and eating too much saturated fat. And it's just not true. And it's sure, cholesterol will be there when there's inflammation. The cholesterol comes to protect the body, and it's just a kind of it's being blamed, but it's actually not the root cause of what's going on. And that's where it's really unfortunate because, I mean, just 150 years ago, heart disease was almost non-existent, and now we think it's the meat that's causing it. Even with the climate change, people think it's, oh, I'm doing a service for the world by not eating meat, but monocrops ruin our soils, and there's only certain amount of times that the soil can be used for monocrops before you can't even plant on that. And so I think that's why they're focusing now on lab meats, because I think they know these kinds of things. And so it's like, I just saw this one company, they isolated a milk protein, and it's plant-based because it's not using the animal, and they're making ice cream from it, and it's completely fake. But they're saying it's sustainable for the climate, and there are more nutrients than just the vitamin A's through the minerals. There's also these smaller different amino acids and other things within a food that I don't think a lab will get 100%. And it's unfortunate to see if people, test themselves with these foods, which are not natural. And it's just the risk of more illness and unwellness.
Is that the world we want to live in, where basically a lab is making all of our foods? I mean, Soylent Green. I mean, it's sort of a sad story of where we're getting in modern medicine. The monolith of science is going to solve all our problems.
Right.
In fact, it's making it more complicated, costly, and deadly. And human beings can't just be human beings anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think of so I healed my mental health from this. And I mean, I didn't tell a lot of my story, but I can tell a little bit more. Like my family was like, I wasn't being normal. And so they called my psychiatrist cousin, and he basically was like, you should check her in. And I don't know what happened. They gave me antipsychotics and I calmed down, but that period of my memory was gone. And I was nursing my 6-month-old child, and I was forced on a 72-hour lockdown because they didn't know what I'd do to myself. And I was in there, and I didn't get to spend New Year's Eve and New Year's Day with my son. And I will never get that back. And I had to stop nursing as well. So then he got on formula, and I thought I was doing the best and getting ones from Germany that were organic and all this other stuff. But one of the key nutrients is a vegetable oil. And that's the best quality I could find at that time. And I didn't even know it was bad. And I never want anyone to go through that. There were days where I was like, I don't want to get up. I don't want to live. Life is so hard. I wish I could just sleep and never wake up again. And I thought I was the one that was broken, that I was not strong enough to eat just plants and be healthy. Why do I need the cupcakes and all that stuff? And then I realized eating meat that, oh my gosh, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And it was actually the diet. And we see so much propaganda. And that's when I became an advocate. And then the crazy thing is, I got my mom and dad to buy in, and they both suffered from metabolic disease. So they were in their 50s, diabetic, high cholesterol. My mom was taking metformin, and she was struggling with dermatitis. At night, she had asthma because of her diabetes. And she was wearing 2 sizes too big of shoes because by the end of their night, her feet were swollen. They are now carnivore for 3 years, and they are on 0 medications. My mom does not have diabetes, and they don't take any statins and any of that. And she doesn't use the inhaler at all. She has an emergency one by her side just in case. And in 3 years, she has never used it. She doesn't get dermatitis. She had to throw away all her big size shoes. And to me, what plant-based food can reverse diabetes and reverse those things that my mom and dad mostly eat meat and they are healing. And these are stories that you will not see eating a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. They are vibrant. And I know that I've given them like 10 more years at least to be with my kids. And that's what life is about, right? It's not, I don't know.
Judy, your passion and sharing that very, very heartfelt emotional story is amazing. And we need more of that, because we need to hear these stories, because I think all of us are suffering. I've had depression before. I know ADHD and all over the place, and migraines and all the physical things. And basically the plants contain every toxin that actually causes all of that. Heroin, cocaine, cyanide, nicotine, marijuana are all in plants, and they make us depressed. They make us suicidal. They make us that way, but we're taught that meat does it. From actually, if you go to Gary Taubes' book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, you'll listen and learn from a very, I think, a dictatorial, domesticated, sort of religious ideas that wanted to corral us all. No disrespect to any religion or spiritual practice, but ultimately we've been duped. We are carnivores, 99%. If we did not find meat, we could eat berries and fresh, ripe fruit and vegetables. But vegetables in general, fiber, to me is deadly. And I'm going to ask you maybe to comment your thoughts, because when I eliminated fiber and vegetables, my bowel bleeding, constipation, GERD, gone. And what's your thoughts on fiber and how healthy it is?
So there was a study, it's been a while since I looked at it, but it's in my book, but they talked about, they had people eat certain amounts of fiber, and they had the decision. So there was this one group that had like limited fiber. There was another group that had more, and then so on and so forth. And then after 6 months, I think they were allowed to eat however much they wanted. And the people that ate none to very little fiber were the ones that had the best gut health afterward. And so they chose not to eat any more fiber. Now that's just a study, so let's move on from that. But if you think about fiber, why do they say that we need plant fiber? It's because they say that they have this ability to produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. That's what our microbiome needs, and so on and so forth. So the argument then is that, well, butter, from the Latin word butyrum, is the highest concentration, and there's a study of that too, the highest concentration of butyrate in its most bioavailable form. So if you really believe in that whole short-chain fatty acids for butyrate and for the microbiome, then just have some butter and you'll have a higher concentration that's more bioavailable. And then the other thing I'll say is, because I specialize in gut health, I do a lot of stool tests. And what I'll tell you is there is no rhyme or reason for people short-chain fatty acids. Some people have higher amounts, some people have low on a carnivore diet. It's not necessarily just the diet, and there's probably other lurking things. So I have seen people on a carnivore diet that their short-chain fatty acids are higher than they should be. There's some that are just moderate, and so on and so forth. And again, it's just, we believe this is true, but what if we just tried an elimination diet of meat only, see how you feel for 1 or 2 months, and then worst case, you can always go back to what you eat now and how you feel now. But I'd say whatever you're doing now may not be working ideally. And what if it was the plants? Like, one thing I'll say is, so I focus on elimination diets, and all of the elimination diets, AIP, so autoimmune paleo, Whole30, GAPS diet, all of these diets from day one, their elimination diet has all the meats, all of them, right? Maybe they don't have sausage or something that's a little bit more processed, but all of them, in some rhyme or reason, even the FODMAP, the SCD diet, all of them remove little bits of plants and fruits, but they try to leave it in to make it more practical. But the one food group they do not leave out on the day one are meats. And why is that? It's just something to consider.
Well, the baby's diet is kind of been my crazy diet in all of this, on bacon, eggs, buttered beef, ice cream, intermittently fasting, by the way. And I'm going to ask you about fasting, what I call intermittent feasting, and salt. And to me, that's the healthiest. I don't usually use pepper, by the way, on my eggs, but my photographers, they just cannot leave this stuff out at all. But what's your thought on how often and when should we eat food, by the way?
So I kind of go by the zero point 0.8 grams per 1 pound of ideal body weight. So in terms of protein, so if I weigh 130 pounds, then I'd probably at least eat about, I think it's like 110 to 130 grams of protein. That's not meat in total, it's the protein in the meat. So that would equate to probably 20 ounces of meat a day. And then you want to make sure, at least in my practice, what's been working is at least 70% of total fat of calories. So that would be, if I'm eating like a 20-ounce ribeye, depending on the cut and depending on how much fat there is, that might be adding 1 or 2 tablespoons of butter. I also think it's ideal to eat a variety on a carnivore diet over long term. If you're going to do it long term, you want to get the seafood, the shellfish, the eggs, because it's just nutrient diversity. And it's just, I think it's a safer bet. We don't know for sure if you could just do beef only. I've seen clients that do beef only long term and it doesn't do so well for them in terms of nutrient profile. When they add a little bit more fish, have a little bit more omega-3s, it becomes a little bit more balanced. So that's just something to consider. But the high fat is key. I think a lot of people, there's trends where, hey, let's just focus on the protein. If I have fat on my body, I don't need to eat fat. And so they're eating super lean proteins of like chicken breast and shrimps. And then they're like, why is my hair falling out? Why do I feel hungry all the time? Why do I have low energy? It's because you need either sugars or fats for fuel. Protein is not a main fuel source. It's a building block source. It's for the amino acids. And so I think high fat is ideally, and for me, that means 70% of your total calories.
How often should we
Oh.
eat?
I know we talked about this last time. So I actually I know you recommend like 1 meal a day, but I recommend 2, just because as a gut focused nutritionist, I think you get 2 chances of eating your food, right? So one, I work with a lot of women. So a lot of women, when they do 1 meal a day, they tend to undereat. And so if I do 2, they have 2 chances of getting their nutrition in, and then 2 chances that their body can absorb the nutrients. So for me, I think 2 is like the sweet spot. I see most people kind of transition there. Some people stay at 3, really depends. But I think it's better than snacking and grazing all the time, because one, you won't be as hungry. Your hormones, leptin and ghrelin, will be a little bit wonky constantly eating, but you just want your body to fuel and then move on, right? Like think of a car when we fuel with gas, we fill the tank once or twice, and then we move on. We're not grazing all the time. That's where I think a lot of the psychology with food needs to be broken. When we take a break, we're like, oh, I'm going to go get a snack. When we are done with the day, we're like, oh, I'm going to relax with food. We have to break these habits. And that's where a lot of the mental health side is really important to work on. When you're healing with food, you have to also heal your relationship with food. It's really, really important.
We have this idea of a relationship with food,
Mm-hmm.
because food is the fuel to allow us to do things.
Right.
It's not our lover. It's just energy in order to keep moving. And
Yeah.
so, it's kind of we obviously, in our world of what we have to sort of mold to what people want to hear, and what they're willing to do. That's kind of the crazy part to all of this. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it though, we are trained and raised that way. So think about when we first have a baby, right? And let's say it's not feeding time and the baby cries. The first thought parents are raised is like, maybe they're hungry, right? So the first thought is, the only way babies know how to communicate is through crying. And we always think the number one and only probable reason is that they're hungry. So at a very young age, we teach, when you're sad, when you're something emotional, try food first. And that's why it's a serious thing that we need to focus on. Is think about like what brings you joy, right? On Fridays we do happy hours. We're like, let's go and eat bar food and fried foods. Let's go celebrate. Let's go get a cake, right? There's like, after a big baseball game, people go get ice cream. Food is very centric to our communities, and that's what we need to fix. Like, that doesn't mean to, sure, mourn the actual food, but that doesn't mean you can't be a part of it. You could have other habits switch. Like, let's say you go to happy hour, maybe you get a sparkling water, and what's so wrong with that? You're not there for the food, you're there for the community and the moments of laughter and the memories. but we think, oh my gosh, now I can't go there. But maybe for a little bit while you change your habits, but afterward you can fully be part of society, fully be part of community. We need community to survive. And so it's just the mental health side is really important, and breaking up with our relationship with food, the unhealthy habits.
It's practice. It's the conversation. It's reading your book. It's listening to you. The more that we do these things, the more our brain is gonna then formulate the changes within us. And we need to practice this every day. I tell all of us that we are the most valuable, expensive, irreplaceable miracle machine ever. Why wouldn't you do something that's hard? Anyone can do easy. Obviously, the challenge is modern medicine. We think we can just go to the doctor, they're going to give us a drug or do a procedure, and we're done. That's it. Actually, we're just suppressing the symptoms, but we're not reducing the actual inflammation that's causing the diseases that are going to basically cause your mental health, your physical health, and end your life prematurely. That's really the biggest thing that I think is important, that we're the cheerleaders, we're the coaches of the change. Without the change, we'd still be back in the same place, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I tell my clients all the time, and my community, the biggest thing is, instead of wanting your children to change or wanting your family members to change, like, you have to be the change, and you have to show, this is my life. This is how I live now as a carnivore, a meat-based person, and look at my healing. And actions speak louder than words. So that's one, right? And then the second thing is, where I was talking about the mental health is, when people venture into a carnivore diet, I don't want them to think, I'm going to do this elimination diet, I have to give up all these foods, and hopefully I'll get better. There's so many, words in there that are, that could make it detrimental, right? So if you're like, I hope is, it's a hope for something to work, but that you're still kind of doubtful about it. And then when you say you're giving up things, that's the funny thing, where people say carnivore is such a restrictive diet. Like, it is technically, in terms of, right, like, you can't eat plants or you can't eat the candies and stuff. But for me, it gave me my life back. I mean, so it's more freedom than anything. I used to struggle with eating disorders, and so I wouldn't go out all the time. If I wasn't thin enough, if I didn't feel well enough, I was locked down in my home. For most of my college years, I barely went out because I felt I was too fat, and I was eating anything and everything I wanted. So it really depends on context, right? When you say something is restrictive, is your life more restricted eating carnivore or eating a plethora of vegetables? It's just, I mean, yeah.
It's what we need to, personally, we need to be encouraging and sharing the idea that obesity is not the cause of any disease.
Right.
Your size is your size, and you're beautiful and perfect, and love it first. And that if you simply change the fueling of this entity, meaning that you change what you eat a optimal human lifestyle diet, what we're meant to eat, as you've shared. And why do you want to eat these poisons? And it's true, we love them because they make us feel good, but I always think that the plants want to control us. They're actually the predators, and we're the prey. They rule the world, by the way. And this is hard for us to understand, but basically the plants are smarter than you and I. We now have to be smarter than them. And ultimately, the elimination is key. Someone was asking about I don't like red meat. What are your thoughts on other things that they could eat that are not red meat?
I have clients that, for religious purposes, cannot eat red meat, and there's some that are intolerant to it. So chicken is fine. If you ate chicken eggs, duck eggs, you had all the fish. I mean, salmon roe and salmon are some of the most nutrient dense foods. So you can completely do this. If you don't like red meat, I mean, who knows? You may have an appetite for it after you eat this way for a while, but it's not necessary to eat this way.
Maybe 500,000 years ago, I don't like red meat. I'd say, okay, die, see you later. And it is because red meat, we're land animals. We hunted the big land animals that were red meat. We ate the fat, the kidney, the liver. We ate it all. We broke the bones and we cooked them. But it was cooking. If you haven't looked at Michael Pollan's and Netflix on cooking. And if you look at the Aboriginal indigenous people of Australia, but all over the world, basically we've forgotten how we really were.
Yes.
We ate the whole animal,
Yes.
and we used the whole animal, and we were grateful to those animals for being our energy source and recognizing them. And when you eat a plant, you kill a plant.
Right.
It's no different.
And the circle of life was then when we died, we would be in the ground and then we would become fertilizer and then we would feed the animals. And it's that is the true beauty and circle of life when we raise our animals well and we die in the way that we're supposed to as well. One thing I wanted to bring up is you brought up how plants are, they're kind of ruling us. And I would agree with that. I mean, I think people should just kind of look at the history of corn and how amazingly they survived and how they used to be these little plants and they realized that they were getting cropped and then something with the way that in the air and then they became these and the only way I think that they can be harvested is by depending on someone to pull them out. And it's just if you read that history of corn, it's kind of scary. So I can see what you're saying.
Well, and every cell of every organism has the potential to change our DNA, change our macro and micro environment. And if you know anything about epigenetics, I mean, basically they're plugging in their DNA right into us. And so, but we're so smart that we're going to control them. And in fact, the opposite is actually true. And as we develop plants in the lab or meats in the lab, I mean, we are just doing their work all day long. And we really need to get back to basics. Go to your local farm. I'm not against eating plants. Minimize their consumption. Stay away from the variety. You cannot have a husband, a wife, and girlfriends or boyfriends on the side. Variety is deadly. Boring is the best way to the best life ever. And babies too, by the way.
Yeah. And if you think about when they say eat the rainbow in the plant world, if you think about it, I mean, let's just say even 200 years ago, how many plants could you have really had on your plate? It's a very new thinking of eat the rainbow of plants. I mean, I think it was coined up less than 100 years ago. Even veganism is less than 100 years old. So at least the coining of the terminology. So it's these things, but when we don't look back at history and we don't have the energy because we have brain fog from eating foods that are not meant for us to be eating, we don't have the capacity to like do things that are harder because these foods kind of dumb us down and make us sick. And so it's just, like challenge thoughts that you have, like, why should we eat a rainbow of plants, right? Didn't really exist 200 years ago. Did my great grandmother really eat a rainbow of plants? And then even the fruits. Sure, eat some fruits when you want, when they're in season. That means that maybe they should be in season 3 months of the year. And they're very small. They're not these hybrid versions that are now in the stores, like cotton candy grapes. They're so big. It's genetically modified and they are super sweet. You don't even need candy.
So I personally am okay with treating and rewarding from time to time. Mm-hmm. I will tell you that a cookie, a cake, and ice cream is better for you than kale, bananas, and salad because they're minus the phytochemicals and they're simplified. So simple sugar is less deadly than complex carbs, and they don't contain as many lectins, oxalates, phytates in general. So what's your thoughts on occasionally rewards and treats?
It depends on the person, right? So for me, for example, when I used to binge and purge and like something would set me off. So like for me, for example, or let's talk about my clients. So if I said, you know what, why don't you add a little bit of apple at night because you're not sleeping as well or something. And that apple would trigger them to have the apple pie. So it depends on context. Ideally, you should be able to have an apple and then move on and it doesn't really bother you. But for some people in the beginning, abstinence is probably key. And this is, again, where it's really important knowing yourself. But I think what you make that point is actually pretty valid. But I would only say as long as the cookie is the highest quality, meaning there's like not seed oils in it, they're not using all these additives that are toxic. But otherwise, you're right. There's probably less anti-nutrients than the actual plants themselves.
How about alcohol? Wine, beer, they're antioxidants. They're really healthy for us. We should have 1 glass a day.
Yeah, so I've been working on a food toxin database and I have to look up every single food with their toxins. And I've been finding it's really interesting. So a lot of people that I've been looking at their blood work, I think it's their AST is going up, so their liver enzyme. And when I dig into it, they're drinking alcohol. So I don't think it's ideal. I just think that, it's a substance. And so maybe once in a while, if that's your kind of sugar, then so be it. But I mean, it has like tannins and it has polyphenols, and these are also anti-nutrients that could bind to things and cause toxins. I mean, if we think of a lot of herbals are medicinal, well, then do you think that medicinals, when used the wrong way, can actually be a toxin, right? It's just like flipping this. It's like, wow, that's so logical, but we don't think of food plants that way. We think they're so herbal and they're healing. They may have some medicinal if we find the right, like, little organic chemistry to use it, but the general plant also has all of it, including the toxins. And so it's just something to consider. Yeah.
So minimize rare, and that's the really the in my opinion, is because we're social animals and we live in this social world of these things, and but recognizing that these are toxic chemicals that damage our brain, our cells, our body, and can be harmful.
Yeah. I mean, I think we know that real life is real life, right? So I'm not someone that's like, you can only eat grass fed, because there's people that financially can't afford it or don't have access to it. So at first it's like, just eat the meat you can. And then over time, as you heal your relationship with food, you heal like any addictions and any of that stuff. If you want to dabble and on your birthday, have a birthday cake, I think that's fine. I think it's just, but you have to know what levers make sense for you and when it makes sense. And so it's not about, no, you have to eat meat all the time. I mean, I think it's ideal that you can eat an apple if it was there, and then you move on and not be like, oh my gosh, now I want an apple pie, right? There's some healing to do there. Or if you can have birthday cake on your birthday because something triggers you, maybe you're not fully healed yet, right? There's things that ideally we can just introduce at times and not be like, well, now you broke your diet. Now you're not consistent. Now you're not this and that. And that's, again, negative talk to yourself. It's a journey. Our diets don't have to be perfect. It's 80% of the time we eat well, or 85%. That's what matters. Not that I'm doing something perfect. I have the perfect macros. I'm eating the perfect source of meats. Like, that's when things get so complicated. And then it becomes easy to go, I'll just eat Pizza Hut, right? That's when it becomes super complicated. So have grace for yourself. Working on the mental health is super important. Focus on meats, the meats that you enjoy. Don't even worry about macros at first. Work to heal your body and get out of that mental fog. Feel how good it feels to eat foods that we are, normally wired to eat. And then you'll see, like, whoa, I've been living in a cloud and I didn't even know it. I didn't know that pain that I was experiencing, which is why I make people do the food and mood journal. But
yeah, I like it's really good.
Like, a lot of people equate pain to, well, I guess this is new. I guess this is what it is when I get older. And it's not. We should not have pain getting older. That's a myth from, I don't know where, but yeah, it's I think just try it. And if worst case, you could say this wasn't for me, and then you move on. But at least try it, because this is the most bioavailable way of eating with the most nutrient-dense foods. And what I mean by bioavailable is the nutrients are in the form that you're able to consume. It's not in the non-heme iron form. It's in the heme iron that your body can absorb. Things like that, like the vitamin K versus K2. There are nutrients that your body, as soon as you eat it, it absorbs, and they are from the meats, not from plant versions. And of course, they don't explain this caveat when they talk about nutrition in plants.
So we make it so complicated, and ultimately, for the infinite years before us in the scientific world, for the last 100 years or something like that, like, there wasn't a book to look at, and we ate a optimal human diet, and we were fine. And obviously, we've improved in a lot of ways. And, and there was a question about whether to get the COVID vaccine. And I say yes, but each individual needs to make their own decision what they do, by the way. I'm not getting into that one.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's simple. isn't it? Eat real food,
Yes.
eat less frequently, less variety, and eat more meat. And I always say the organ meats, the whole chicken, the bone broth, and eat the skin. And if you cook it in a pot where you collect all the grease, the fat, like eat that, right? Isn't that what we want to do?
Absolutely. And like I've shared about eating too much liver is not ideal. I do think you can eat the organs. I completely agree with you there. I think sometimes we try to overdo good, right? So when there's like a lot of nutrition, we're like, oh, I'll just eat a pound of liver in a sitting or half a pound. And that's where it's like, no, the animal has maybe a 10-pound organ and the rest is muscle meat. So we should eat that in proportion. And so I agree, though, you should eat everything. I mean, every single part of the animal. There was a documentary I watched. It was like a survival. And this man lived in the Arctic and he found a big buffalo and then he ate every single part of the body, every single part. And some parts he used to make gloves and then some of the food, like it was. And that's the way we should be eating. And that's what allowed him to win and survive. But it's if we the goal is that we use this food and mood journal to then understand our body's mechanisms and our cues. But the long term is, yes, as you eat your food, you'll know when you're satiated. You'll know when you're not. We need to get back to trusting our body's innate wisdom. Think about when we smell rotten food. Our first instinct is to have a scowl and kind of lean back because it's like, whoa, what is that smell? That is our body's innate wisdom saying, don't eat that. It's going to make you sick. So when we force kids to like, let me bake broccoli into butter, or let me grind it into a puree. Maybe the thing is that our babies aren't supposed to be eating those veggies or not as much of it. And maybe we introduce a piece of like a long piece of steak. I don't think there's children that are like, oh, that's gross, right? I mean, maybe some of the texture I hear, but over time, if a child or a human is hungry, meat never sounds bad. And you may have to find the right meats for you. You may have to work on understanding your body's cues, but over time, if you start feeling really hungry eating just meat, you might think, oh, I may need a little bit of more fat. And then you just eat 2 more tablespoons of butter. It shouldn't be complicated, but we complicate things. And when we use science, we think, oh, we're smarter. So there were no calculators like 100 years ago. There were no calorie calculators. Just think about that. There was no this amount of nutrition and this amount of fat, and now we're so dependent on it and what to eat and how much to eat in a day.
It is a little crazy. Coffee, tea, and water. Are coffee, tea okay? How much? And then we're just kind of, what are your thoughts on it? And then the water, how much?
Okay, so I'll say with coffee and tea, it depends. I mean, there's a lot of teas that have a lot of anti-nutrients as well. They have so I think it has tannins that will bind to iron. So then imagine eating tea or coffee with your meat. Then you're probably not getting as much iron. Now, if you have an hemochromatosis or you have excess iron, maybe it's a good thing, right? But in general, it's not ideal to eat those. I mean, coffee is one of the most largest culprits of harboring mold and even labor things, right? So I think in general, if you could do maybe herbal teas, it might be a little bit better. There's also, I did a blog post on caffeine, and there's a lot of people that suffer from anxiety. And there was a great book out that I read about caffeine, and it says for majority of the people, if you just cut out caffeine from their diet, they may never need to get on anti-anxiety medication. So before you prescribe medications of anxiety, maybe you just cut down all caffeine. And the thing is, caffeine is in everything. So it's in coffee and teas, but it's in our Sunkist, it's in cereals, it's in yogurts, and it causes people to be a little bit more addicted because caffeine is a substance. So like real life, I still drink 1 cup of coffee in the morning. In a perfect world, I wouldn't, but I do. But I try to limit it so it doesn't affect my sleep in the evening. There are different bodies and mechanisms that the caffeine stays longer in the body. For example, pregnant women, the caffeine stays in much longer than it does for somebody that's a smoker. So you have to know these nuances. But ideally, if you can remove it, it would be better. You'll have less risk of mold, less risk of the anti-nutrients binding to your foods. And then just have your own energy, right? But then there's also real life. So you got to figure that out. In terms of water, the general rule of thumb is half of your body weight in ounces. I do think carnivores tend to drink a little less because we don't eat the carbohydrates that with the salt that make us super thirsty. So we tend to drink a little less. I would try to get closer to the half of your body weight in ounces. So if you weigh 130, that's 65 ounces a day. Maybe add a little pinch of salt so that it'll absorb better, but also go by your thirst. So if you are like, I really don't need the water, maybe you don't, right? So, but make sure and hydrate. So there's indications when you're dehydrated, like lower energy, drier skin. And so you just got to kind of keep a pulse that way.
Tell us where people can find you,
okay,
and also talk to you and get your coaching and your advice.
Sure. So I have my book is Carnivore Cure. It's on Amazon. It's also on the Carnivore Cure website, carnivorecure.com. We're working on a food toxin database. So if you're like, I cannot remove all the vegetables, but I want to leave in a little, like, how can I just take a step down approach into eliminating? That's what that database is going to be all about. It'll have different elimination diets and different food toxins so that you can eliminate the foods that maybe make more sense for you. And that is what I've been spending a lot of time working on. You can find me on nutritionwithjudy.com. I have blog posts and articles. I have a weekly newsletter that gives you tools to kind of improve your health, right? So if carnivore isn't perfectly working for you, maybe you could try this and that. And the type of stuff I put in the newsletter. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I have 2 podcasts, Nutrition with Judy's podcast that's also on YouTube, and then a Cutting Against the Grain podcast, which I do with my co-host, Laura Spath.
Awesome. Judy, God bless you. And thank you so much for spending this beautiful Sunday morning with me. And we'll keep following you. We're looking forward to lots of great advice and information. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And again, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, drkiltz.com, and also CNY Fertility. We look forward to sharing more and share the health and wellness that you're learning from people like Judy and so many more. So God bless. And
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Judy.